Good evening. I'd like to call to order tonight's meeting, City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commissioners meeting, regular meeting for October 15th. Ms. Przinski, would you call roll, please?
Yes, Bill Spicer.
Here.
Betsy Kramer. Here. Dennis Power. Here. Colleen Webb. Here. Jim Sloan and Stephen McIntosh will be out, and Corey Bantolin is running behind.
Okay. Mr. Reedman, it appears we have a light agenda. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda?
Mr. Chair, no changes this evening.
Okay. I see there's some people in the chambers. This is time for public comment on anything that's not on the agenda. If anybody wanted to speak. Very good. Thank you. We move to approval of the minutes. I would entertain a motion.
I move we waive further reading of the minutes and approve the regular meeting minutes of September 17, 2015. And
Great.
I'll second that.
Great. A first and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any nays or abstentions? There are none. Which takes us, Mr. Reedman, in the director's report, please.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Since we met last, the Council authorized me to execute an agreement with the California Department of Parks and Recreation, Division of Boating and Waterways, to accept a $30,200 grant for removal of abandoned or voluntarily surrendered vessels associated with hazards to navigation. So this should come in hopefully handy with this winter's expected El Nino. We get a 90% reimbursement for boats that are wrecked and abandoned on the beach, and then we'll remove them and get a reimbursement through this grant. We've put it to good use over the years. Council additionally approved a 5-year service agreement with Echo Wireless, providing wireless internet service to the harbor area users on a subscription basis at no cost to our department, to the waterfront department. So it's a subscription basis, just primarily directed at visiting boaters that come in and would like to have wireless internet service. And in terms of tentative items for the November meeting, we will be bringing to you our El Nino storm preparations for this winter. As we've all seen, the predictions are getting stronger and stronger and more confident, which is good news and bad news. And also we'll have the slip lottery list drawing, and those are the tentative items for November. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Any questions for Mr. Reedman? Commissioner Kramer.
I have one question, Scott, and thank you for your report. But I noticed there was a small sailboat on the beach this past week or a week or so ago. Was it able to be rescued, or was it demolished?
Okay.
It was gone by the next evening.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, I believe that one broke up almost immediately upon hitting the beach and was taken apart.
No, it wasn't broken up in the afternoon and the evening when it went ashore.
Okay, then I'm not familiar with that.
I can add a little bit to that. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, that boat did break up, and a lot of it came ashore, but as the tide changed, we were able to go in there in cooperation with Parks and Public Works and get a grapple, get a purchase on the rigging and the mast and all of that, and we hauled all the important stuff out of the water, the big stuff that could pose a public hazard. So that was cleaned up within 48 hours. We got all that stuff off the beach. Well, the only thing that might theoretically still be embedded in the sand is the keel.
Okay, because it looked in pretty good shape on the first afternoon there when it was there. But
yeah, it broke up real quickly. But yeah, and there were tidal issues. It was real hard to get to. We couldn't get heavy equipment in there as the tide was too high. But once the tide went down, we were able to get, like I say, a purchase on it and get everything off it except the keel.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? I just have one. Scott, how does the grant this year compare to years past? More or less?
Sure. Mr. Chair, more.
Great.
We're very fortunate, although it is a combination of our abandoned watercraft abatement fund and the vessel turn-in program. Those are both averaging $8,000 to $10,000 apiece. So combined, getting $30,000, we feel very fortunate. And we've also been working on reducing our costs, streamlining our process for disposing of these vessels, getting up and out. And so we're crossing our fingers. This should hopefully last us the winter, but we have a big question mark kind of winter coming.
Thank you. And my compliments. I mean, as we expect a larger storm, it's nice to have a larger fund. So,
And we were just notified yesterday that the grant has been fully executed, so we're ready to go.
congrats. Thank you for your report, Mr. Reedman. Move to Mr. Crum, Harbor Operations.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, good evening. We were fortunate last month to be able to accommodate a Navy destroyer. The USS Gridley visited for a few days in the middle of September, actually the week of September 21st. Their primary purpose for the visit was crew leave. There were no public tours of the Gridley, but I'm happy to report also that Poseidon joined Santa Barbara before a long deployment. Several of Gridley's crew participated in community service events, including a beach cleanup on East Beach and reading with elementary school students at Elwood Elementary School. This is particularly kind of impressive when you think of the fact that these folks have been on the ship on long deployments already. They get a few days off, and some of them have the community spirit and the heart to go in and do this kind of work. So we're very, very grateful to them for that. And the visit went seamlessly. The ships come every 2 or 3 years. I was looking through my notes, and the most recent one were the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan in 2014, and before that, the USS Milius, which was a destroyer not entirely unlike this in the Arleigh Burke class. So it happens every 2 to 3 years, sometimes back-to-back years, but we have a pretty good plan working with the Navy League to accommodate these visits. We have a good relationship with the Navy, and we hope to see them back again in the not-too-distant future. So if anything is a harbinger of fall, it's the fact that lobster season has begun. The recreational season began on October 3rd, followed by the commercial season on October 7th, and hundreds of Santa Barbara sport divers, hoop netters, and commercial divers hit the seas that week. Hauls seem to be moderate to good. Prices are in the good to average range for the commercial fishermen, and as a result, we expect there to be plentiful lobster day after tomorrow at the Harbor Festival. That's Saturday, October 17th, 10 to 5, the Harbor Festival. But what's also interesting is the fact that with the warm water El Nino, these animals may extend past their normal range, and it might not be out of the question that we see lobsters all the way to Vandenberg, when in fact, or the Portuguelo Vandenberg area, when their typical range biologically is from Magdalena Bay to Point Conception. But in years like this is a year where we're seeing hammerheads and turtles and what have you. The lobsters could be all the way up to Vandenberg. Commercial fishermen are a little reticent to fish up in that area, commonly known as Hurricane Gulch. One big swell in there can take out your whole line of traps, but I know some lobstermen are kind of considering the fact that they get the right window to take a shot up there and see what it looks like. This is also, I wanted to give you sort of a visual on what landings look like in the El Nino years, and this is a graph of lobster landings commercially since 2010, and what this indicates is in average years, they're 60 to 70,000 pounds, but last year, as the water started to warm, we didn't get the full El Nino we expected weather-wise, but the water did start warming last year, and you can see landings jumped up to 107,000 pounds, so I wouldn't be surprised if we exceeded that this year, and we'll just have to wait and see, but I just wanted to show you the warm water effect here on the lobster landings. Classic example, some of the Bren students behind me here know that I've talked to them about this before. This is something you look at and you go, wow, this is really abundant. There's a whole sidebar discussion about abundance versus availability. And the lobster fishery, fortunately, is both. The animals are abundant, the fishery is sustainable, but in years like this, availability with more animals in the area because of the warm water becomes a factor as well. And finally, I wanted to take an early opportunity to remind the Commission and the public that the Parade of Lights comes a little earlier this year, December 6th. And owing to the confluence of a number of factors, including the fact it's on the eve of Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, that we're going to have our awards ceremony at the Veterans Hall this year, we're organizing this Parade of Lights around the notion of honoring our veterans. In fact, the theme for this year's parade is going to be a red, white, and blue holiday, and easy to decorate too. That's part of the good news. But Dominique Samario, my colleague and administrative analyst with the department, have been visiting with the Veterans Hall folks and the veterans over across the street. The Veterans Hall, as a reminder, is about halfway from the harbor to Stearns Wharf, a very easy walk for boaters participating in the parade. And we've been meeting with them, and we've met a lot of really, truly honorable people. And Dominique and I got together, and with Scott's blessing, we've decided to make this the focus of this year's Parade of Lights, to honor the veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War. They're all over there. A lot of them will be present at the awards ceremony. People coming to the awards ceremony might have a unique opportunity to meet some veterans they never thought they would be able to meet. And so that's the plan for now. It's going to be catered by the Waterfront Grill and Endless Summer Bar Cafe. And although it's early, we've already got registration forms out at the fuel dock and at the harbor market. And slip permittees will be receiving registration forms in the November slip building, which will go out approximately October 26th. And with that, I would conclude my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Croman? Commissioner Power.
Yes, a lobster question. You indicate in your written report that there could be an increase in abundance and a northward extension of the range based on the warm water surge that we're experiencing. Is that likely to happen in 2016, or is there a lag for these things?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, a question that only could be that complex would come from a zoology major, because I really don't know the answer to it. But just for the record, I didn't mention abundance in my report. My report's about availability. I don't believe I mentioned abundance. But I
saw plentiful catches, and so I interpreted it.
Yeah, and that's the availability. That's the landings part of it. I really don't know if it'll carry over. They're expecting the El Nino to last well into March, but that's when the season closes. So when it reopens next October, we'll have to look at the ocean conditions and see what it looks like then. I apologize, a harbor manager, but not a lobster biologist.
Please don't feel obligated to get back to me on that.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Commissioner Webb.
Thank you for your report, Mick. I have a question about the lobster pots. How does one determine where they put them?
Fair question, good question, especially since the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is currently developing its lobster fishery management plan. I believe they expect to finish that work this spring. It varies from small boats, small strings of pots, say 50 pots, fished discreetly around certain rock piles and certain reefs and what have you, to individuals who choose to run larger strings up to 500 or 600 traps, and they might just blanket the 40-foot curve on the south side of Santa Cruz, for example. So it's entirely variable. One of the cornerstone or central themes of the lobster fishery management plan that's under the microscope right now is the potential for trap limits. There are some folks who believe that an endless amount of traps is not appropriate. Some folks down in the San Diego area have trap strings up to 900 or 1,000 traps. And one of the central aspects of that issue is the fact that California Department of Fish and Game or the Fish and Wildlife law requires that you turn the trap every 96 hours so the animals don't just sit there and rot and eat themselves. And some folks are of the notion that running a huge string makes it very, very difficult for fishermen to meet that legal guideline, that legal mandate to turn those traps and rebait them. I know fishermen who run 500 or 600 traps and fish really, really hard and are able to do it, but I think the Department of Fish and Wildlife is considering that as part of the mix of sort of moving parts when it makes its decision on not only the trap limits potentially, but also the other parameters of the fishery that they may want to deal with, like permits and transferability of permits and stacking permits. It gets really complicated, but I hope that's a long-winded answer to a short question.
Well, they are certainly a hazard to navigation right now. They are everywhere. So it's. I wondered if it was regulated. So.
Understood. I was on a dive boat a couple of weeks ago. We couldn't find a place to anchor at the northwest side of Anacapa Island. It's in the process of being considered, like I said, under the microscope. Right now is the exact time when the fishery management plan is being developed, and that is one of the major questions.
Commissioner Power.
Yes, further to Commissioner Webb's question, what about narrowing the geographic area to, say, just off Ledbetter, Henry's Beach, the area right outside the waterfront where there's a lot of boating activity? Are there any restrictions at all nearer to shore, basically right outside the harbor?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, I believe there are. I think it's 500. Don't take this as gospel. It's either 500 feet or 500 yards. I think it's 500 feet from a pier or jetty. But in terms of the waterway, like up to Ledbetter and what have you, I don't believe there are any specific restrictions. And on a side note, part of the concentration you see of lobster gear where we see it these days, some might argue is a function of the establishment of marine protected areas where they can't use them anymore. We're seeing a lot more influx of lobster fishermen who used to fish San Diego County, Orange County, where there are a ton of marine protected areas down there, have relocated their efforts to the northern Channel Islands. This is a phenomenon known as, externalities, the external consequences of one policy sort of, bubbling out in another area. But I don't know how hard they're looking at that. I know they're looking a lot at the productiveness of the MPAs, the biological productiveness. But the externalities and the crowding on the grounds is something that we see on an everyday basis.
Commissioner Kramer.
And I have a question, Mick, in terms of the honoring the veterans. I assume you're reaching out to all of them, and I'm wondering how you're doing that, and if that includes the contingent that is at the foot of Stearns Wharf often, and was a couple of days ago.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kramer, there are 240 people who can cram into the Veterans Hall at the awards party. And, of course, the boaters who participate in the parade will be, primary invitees. We are creating an RSVP-type postcard, and we are giving it to the woman. Her name's Carmen Munoz. She's a county employee who runs the affairs at the Veterans Building. And we're letting her make that discretionary call. We're not going to be personally reaching out because we don't know the veteran community like she knows it. And I think she'll be making the call. We hope to maybe be able to get 50 to 75 veterans at the building as well as the boaters who participate in the parade.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Mick, thank you for your report. And if somebody wanted to get a lobster on Saturday, where would they go?
The Harbor Festival, thank you for asking me. I would have forgotten otherwise. The Santa Barbara Harbor and Seafood Festival, Saturday, 10 to 5. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chris Collier would like to speak regarding the Plains All-America Pipeline. Please approach.
Thank you very much.
Try that now.
Hey, there we are.
There you go.
Thank you very much. I was going to make a joke about sneezing and being allergic to shellfish, but I'm not, so it is what it is. Thank you for having me here this evening. We specifically asked for this to be agendized so that I can answer questions. I'm here on behalf of Plains All-American Pipeline, as working with them in community engagement here in Santa Barbara County. The reason that we've come tonight is we want to make sure we're getting the word out about the claims process. I've been at this for a few weeks. We're speaking to different community groups, and the Harbor Commission, of course, being an area that was potentially affected with the folks that own boats that are active in the ocean. We wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to just talk a little bit about the claims process and also answer any questions about that process you may have. So if a business or income was affected by the spill, Plains is deeply regretful that the release happened to begin with and is committed to doing the right thing. And that means making sure that anybody who was affected has the opportunity to file a claim in the process. There is a website that has been set up where you can put your information in. That is plainsline901response.com. And that website has a button, file a claim. You fill out the information, and someone will be reaching out to you very shortly. There's also a phone number, 866-753-3619. And that phone number goes directly to the claims call center that's operated during the day, so folks can talk directly to the folks that have that process the claims. So anyone who has lost profits or had earnings directly affected because of the incident, damaged or impaired their business or where they happen to work as an employee, tourism-based businesses and those who receive wages from any tourism businesses, those who make a living from natural resources that were lost or damaged due to the release, commercial fishermen and related businesses, individuals who are injured, individuals and businesses whose property was damaged or destroyed, and those who have homes, boats on the affected beaches. So there's a lot of different things in there, and we just want to make sure that everybody knows that that's the case. I don't work directly for Plains. I'm here in Santa Barbara and Ventura County reaching out to these groups, and I'm going to be here over the next several months making sure that as many people as possible get the word out about this. So does the Commission have any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Collier?
What's the website again? I didn't catch it.
PlainsLine901response.com.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the phone number, too?
Yes, 866-753-3619. We have also been running advertisements in local print media, the Independent, the News Press, I think the Sentinel, Montecito Journal, so all the local publications, and then online. We've had several 100,000 impressions in our little online ad tracker, making sure that people see the opportunity to file a claim. And it has a direct link to the website on the online ads and as well as the phone number. So we're trying to make sure that everyone in the region has the opportunity to file a claim.
Commissioner Kramer.
I've got one more. How long do you expect the claims process to take? I mean, from somebody filing to getting it to...
It varies. I know that they are trying to process as quickly as possible.
Sure.
Once somebody enters into the claims process, it's a confidential process, so I don't know the exact timeline. But I know that they are working as quickly as possible to get as many claims processed as they can. We want to make sure everyone has the opportunity.
You don't have any sense of how long, as quick as possible?
I know that claims that have been enacted since over the last few months have been started to be filled. So it's not a year process, it's a months or weeks process. And depending on how many claims, I don't know how many claims are in the system right now, but it's just a processing issue.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Well, I appreciate you coming here and taking the time to fill people in.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm glad I could speak. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item number 5. Mr. Bossy, new business? Oh, sorry. Jeanette?
Item 5, 5-year office lease agreement with Bob Meyer. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with Bob Meyer for a 218-square-foot office located at 125 Harbor Way, number 12, at a rate of $541 per month, subject to annual cost of living increases.
Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. The lease before I have 2 leases before you tonight. The first one, as Ms. Brzezinski stated, is with Bob Meyer. Bob Meyer has managed the fuel dock since 1985, and he's done that under contracts with a whole number of different fuel providers, but he has been the one consistent part of the fuel dock for many, many years. The proposed lease is for office space at 125 Harbor Way, number 12, where Mr. Meyer uses the space for management and administration of the fuel dock activities. The space itself is right here, the hatched out area, number 12 there. It's 218 square feet, and this is located basically between the Brophy's building, which is right here, and our offices, which are on the other side. Mr. Meyer is a tenant in good standing, again, since 1985. The proposed term is for 5 years, expiring on December 31st of 2020. The proposed rental rate or lease rate is $541 per month. And as with almost all of our leases, we do have an annual rent adjustment in accordance with the Consumer Price Index. That is the end of my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, 5-year lease with Mr. Bob Meyer, $541 a month, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Bossy? Commissioner Power.
Just one point of clarification. I think this is what the written report says, but Mr. Meyer is a contractor for McCormick's, so he is on contract, not an employee of McCormick's.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, two different things. So you've got the fuel dock itself, and that's a completely separate lease. I believe that's up in 2 years. And then this is just with Bob Meyer to run his management and administration of the fuel dock.
Correct.
So whoever's out, he runs it through McCormick's Fuel, who
Yes.
then they're the current provider of fuel at that particular site. And that goes through an RFP process as well, and has been, I think, Unical, Tosco, and a number of other companies through time. But right now it's McCormick's.
Yeah, I think I understand that. So as a contractor, he is independently renting space from the waterfront department.
Exactly. So the employees...
no connection with McCormick's, I realize, for the lease that we're talking about.
You got it.
Right, yeah.
We'll be back in a couple of years with that one.
Okay. I would make the motion that we accept this,
Second.
and there's a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Very good. Mr. Meyer is approved. Item number 6. Jeanette, please.
Item 6, 5-year lease agreement for a 547-square-foot public visitor center located on the 3rd floor of the Waterfront Center building at 113 Harbor Way. Recommendation that Harbor Commission review and recommend to the City Council approval of a 5-year lease agreement with the National Park Service, Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, and the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum for a 547-square-foot public visitor center located on the 3rd floor of the Waterfront Center building at 113 Harbor Way.
Mr. Bossy.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, this is an interesting one. As Ms. Brzezinski just talked about, this is a lease between 4 different organizations, the National Park Service, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. 3 of those 4 are government entities, and yet we're still here with a lease that everything got worked out. So we're very happy about that. And it didn't take a long time. The Harbor Visitor Center is located on the 3rd floor of the Waterfront Center building and was constructed back in the year 2000. The Visitor Center is open to the public. It's free of charge and provides marine and environmental education opportunities, and by far the best view of the harbor there is. And we like to spread that word. If you're looking for a picture of the harbor, that's the place to go. The space itself, again, 547 square feet. And I've been talking with, as part of this whole process, with the Maritime Museum, who's in charge of staffing the visitor center. It's staffed by volunteers, and they do a running tally of the number of people that go up there. To date, as of this calendar year, they've had, this is as of last week, 21,105 visitors to the space, and last year they were at 18,250 at the same time. So that's a nice little almost 3,000 person increase. So obviously the word is getting out. Again, beautiful view, nice place to learn about all the amenities we have off of our coast here. Now the proposed lease terms, again, a 5-year lease term. It's an agreement between 4 different entities, Channel Islands, National NOAA, and the Maritime Museum. It's open to the public. It's staffed by volunteers, and it is free of charge to the public. And it's definitely a model of cooperation between the various levels of government, as well as our Maritime Museum and the city. And it provides educational opportunities for the public, and it really gets the word out there. It's a nice place to go and gets the word out there and complements all the other activities that you see down in our harbor. And with that in mind, we think that the current rate of $0 is acceptable, and we leave that with you. Again, 5 years, no lease rate, and staffed by volunteers. Nothing's for sale there. It's not a money-making opportunity, but it is a great opportunity for the public. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? I'm sorry, Helene.
It does seem like one of the world's best kept secrets, kind of. But maybe there at some point could be a little more signage to it, or because it is an amazing view, and place, so, and the rent's good.
I would echo that. I was curious, how do people currently find this spot?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. It is advertised on the Maritime Museum's website. There is some signage placed out front on the upper deck of the Waterfront Center building outside the Maritime Museum store. We have had issues in the past where there was a little bit too much signage, kind of all over, but we've worked with everybody to curtail that activity. And, word of mouth. I was actually surprised that there were 21,000 people. I had no idea. I mean, because it is a nice little hidden gem. I tell everybody I know when they're down in the area to go up there. It's easy. You hop on the elevator right inside the Waterfront Center building, and you're up there. But we can work with, one thing I have been thinking about is working with the Maritime Museum to somehow get that word out a little better, maybe just better signage with the existing signage, and see what we can come up with.
Yeah. Commissioner Power.
My first question was why we had to have a lease with 3 entities when my assumption was it was the Maritime Museum that was pulling information from the National Park Service and the National Marine Sanctuary. So I guess I'm wondering, does the Park Service and NOAA have any real activity there, or is it really the Maritime Museum just pulling information that would come from those resources?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Power, originally this lease was with the National Forest Service, National Park Service, and NOAA, and the Maritime Museum was not a part of it. And so it was these 3 federal agencies built out the space, put the tile decoration on the decorative floor and on the Shumash images on the walls and so forth, and it was to, bring information to the visitors about the National Forest, Los Padres National Forest, as well as the Channel Islands National Park and so forth. After 2 or 3 lease cycles, the Forest Service dropped out and the Maritime Museum jumped in, which actually was very beneficial to the whole operation because the Forest Service was the Maritime Museum was uniquely positioned to guide more people up there from their their volunteers downstairs. The initial impetus for having the visitor center came from the National Park Service, so they were really the major player in this all along. So, and I believe they still provide volunteers up there. So it's definitely a shared operation. I would say now at this point, the museum has played a bigger role just due to the proximity, but that's how it all began, and that's how we ended up where we are now.
Thanks. That is very clear. I just wonder if there's someday perhaps when the Maritime Museum might really run the whole thing and maybe even do more. I don't, as I said, I've not seen the Park Service have a presence there, but I understand the history now that you've outlined that. So that's good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'd entertain a motion for this.
I recommend approval of this very important lease.
Great, we have a first and a second. Did you get that? Great. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Great, well, their lease rate stays. Very good, that brings us to staff communications. Anything to report, Mr. Reedman?
Mr. Chair, there's just one small item. In August, you may remember the Waterfront Department hosted in cooperation with the Yacht Club the FAR 40 North American Championships, big sailing event, and that was a lead up to the FAR 40 Worlds, which were in September. And I'm happy to report that John DeMarcos and on his boat Gruvaderci won the World Championship in Long Beach in the FAR 40s, which is a huge honor because it's monstrously competitive racing with the most elite skilled sailors in the world. So I know you'll join us in congratulating Mr. DeMarcos and his crew on a fabulous achievement.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, great news. All right, if there's nothing else, then unless there's an objection, I'll call for adjournment. All in favor? Aye.